Good morning. We come to God's house and to this gathering with an intention of our confessions and what is on our hearts and minds to be shared with God. We are forgiven by the grace of God. Let us now prepare to come into the presence of God by taking a moment of silence so that we may make our own individual confessions. Amen. Anyone who stands with Christ and is born again is a new creation. The old life is gone, a new life has begun. Know that you are forgiven and be at peace.
Thanks be to God.
We continue in our time of prayer by sharing prayers as a congregation. Does anyone have anything they'd like us to be specifically praying for today? Please.
Yeah, I want to pray for all the people in the Ukraine that are being violated so bad.
Yes.
It does triumph over evil.
Yes.
Also protect the world from food.
Yes. I agree, and we will be talking about that further as well. So
That was the same. Pray for Ukraine.
our prayers are for the Ukraine today. It seems like that is the dominant thing to pray for sure. Are there other things people would like to share?
Bobby Shepherd gets a cancer treatment.
Anyone else?
Pastor Clint Street and his wife Dee.
Okay. Lord Jesus, we come before you this morning with heavy hearts as we worry for the situation in the Ukraine. We've known it was probably coming for weeks, and we've mentioned it here Sundays before, but somehow when it arrives, it's even worse than we imagined in many ways. We ask you to show mercy on the many, many innocent civilians in particular who are suffering, the women and children and men who do not want war, but are targeted nonetheless. We ask you, Lord, to be not only with the Ukraine, but with all those bordering countries that now are under such anxiety that they could be next. And we ask you to help the NATO alliance stand strong, as that is the best defense we have against what's going on right now. And we ask you to guide our leaders, President Biden, his cabinet, our Department of State, all those who are in some way on the ground or even more local at home making decisions on all of this. It is a challenge to know not just the Christian response, but also the global response to something like this. And nobody wants world war, Lord, so we ask you to guide us in a good direction and keep leaning toward a prudent response and not a rash one. Lord, we ask you for individuals in our midst that you continue to hold up Bobby Shepherd and be with him for his cancer treatment. We ask you to continue to be with Pastor Plum Street and Dee. There are so many individual things that we come here with, Lord, and we know that you see what's on our hearts and minds. You hear our silent prayers for help. You meet us in our struggles, even if we don't say them aloud. So we ask you, Lord, to just hear our prayers today, both said and unsaid. And we thank you for teaching us your prayer, which says, Our Father,
Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Today's scripture is a very long one, actually, but I kept, when I was struggling with it, to go back to context and rewind, and to be perfectly honest, I could have included 16 Samuel too, but I won't do that to you. 1 Samuel 17, we did talk even just before worship about whether you would prefer if I would only do a portion of it. But we decided that I would read the entire chapter, because even though it is long, it provides some important context, and is so timely as it is as well. This is the story of David and Goliath, as you might know, but there is far more to it as well. We'll get into that a little bit. Now, the Philistines had gathered their armies for battle. They were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Soko and Azekah in Ephes-Dammim. Saul and the Israelites gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah and formed ranks against the Philistines. Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side of the valley in between them. And there came out of the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had greaves of bronze on his legs and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And his shield bearer went before him. He stood and he shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and I kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "Today I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were greatly dismayed and they were greatly afraid. Now David was the son of an Ephraite of Bethlehem in Judah. He was named Jesse, and he had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. The 3 eldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul into battle. The names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and next to him, Abinadab, and the third, Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward, and they took his stand, and morning and evening he was prepared to fight. Jesse said to his son David, "Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See how your brothers fare and bring some token back from them." Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, took the provisions, and went just as Jesse his father had commanded him. He came to the encampment as the army was going forth to the battle line, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, ran to the ranks, and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. All the Israelites, when they saw the man, fled from him and were very much afraid. The Israelites said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he will come to defy Israel. The king will greatly enrich the man who kills him and will give him his daughter and make his family free in Israel." David said to the men who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The people answered him in the same way. "So shall it be done for the man who kills him." His eldest brother Eliab heard him talking to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against his brother David. He said, "Why have you come down? With whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down just to see this battle." And David said, "What have I done now? It was only a question." He turned away from him toward another, and he spoke in the same way, and the people answered David again as before. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul said to David, "You're not able to go against this Philistine just to fight with him, for you are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." David said, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped Saul's sword over the armor, and he tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot walk with these, for I am not used to them." So David removed them, and he took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi, and put them in his shepherd's bag, in the pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. The Philistine came on and drew near to David, with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the field." But David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord, and he will give you into our hand. When the Philistine drew nearer to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, striking down the Philistine and killing him. There was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine. He grasped his sword, drew it out of his sheath, and he killed him. And then he cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. The troops of Israel and Judah rose up with a shout and pursued them as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that wounded Philistines fell on the way from Sharem as far as Gath and Ekron. The Israelites came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. David took the head of Goliath and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. When Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is this young man?" Abner said, "As your soul lives, O king, I don't know." The king said, "Inquire whose son this stripling is." On David's return from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine Goliath in his hand. Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite." The word of the Lord. When I first began preparing for this week, I was also watching with the rest of the world, so concerned about the direction the world was headed. As many of us watched in horror, Vladimir Putin of Russia finally made good on his threat going back years. The rhetoric he had spouted was against many peoples in truth. At this time, he was focused on the nation of Ukraine. He launched an attack from different directions and by different means, overtaking everything from small islands to Chernobyl, to major cities with troops and tanks and airstrikes and more. These are actions which continue today. They've been condemned by every living US president but one. This is truly the stuff of war. And reflecting on this world event, the news outlet CNN published online an important piece. It likened the situation to David and Goliath. I was a little surprised to see that in a mainstream worldwide news source. And on the surface, we can see exactly why they jumped to that. However, they weren't offering us the Bible. They were offering the secular aspect of all of this. Ukraine's military infrastructure is estimated to be perhaps 10% the size of Russia's. If Ukraine were to call up every single one of their reserves, not just active duty, in their entire country, they would just reach almost 1 million people, or the number of active duty personnel Russia has on hand. However, if Russia calls up all of their troops and adds their reserves, their army grows to 3 million. So whereas one cannot muster even 1 million, the other would be at 3. In fact, Ukraine wanted to join NATO and has continued to strive for that. And they've continued to be turned down for not being able to contribute enough of a military presence specifically. Given their precarious position geographically, the other nations in the NATO alliance have never had any doubt that one day they could be called upon to defend the Ukraine. And their demand ongoing has always been that Ukraine has to be able to provide a large percentage of their defense, because otherwise there isn't that much benefit in this deal for the current countries in the NATO alliance. However, Ukraine has never been able to meet all of the demands of their would-be allies. And it's striking because their economy is much wealthier than many people realize. The CNN article mentioned in facts and figures the deposits of oil and minerals, and the fact that the Ukraine is an agricultural country. They're capable of feeding all of their own people and many others besides, much like the United States. Any issues are issues of distribution, not issues of potential. Ukraine is exactly the sort of up-and-coming, thriving democracy that is a threat to Vladimir Putin. Now, one may read all these facts and figures and think that they've read the David and Goliath story. However, for believers, it's immediately obvious that the Bible is not in this account. The biblical account of David and Goliath is not really well represented at all, because it is focused so much, as is much of the world, on the huge difference in infrastructure, military capabilities, and material wealth between the two countries. Perhaps for many nations in the world, it is enough for them to consider this from a secular viewpoint, offering analysis in economic and militaristic terms, focused on the political science, the diplomacy, the geopolitical landscape, and international relations. However, I would say the data they analyze is no substitute for faith. This first account is not the biblical account. For that, we need to actually turn to Scripture. The Philistines were sometimes known as people of the sea. They were at one time those who ruled over a large coastland that ran from Joppa all the way to the Wadi Gaza. It had 5 main cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. Over time, the Israelites warred with them and eventually defeated them. They were then folded into Israel, and they ceased to exist as a separate people. However, at the time of the writing of 1 Samuel, they are still very much a separate people. To be clear, they are the enemy. They are the more powerful people, and they have a giant on their side, well-armored Goliath, who comes happy to fight for them. In fact, in the story, he seems to serve no other purpose, but is that of a warrior, and is defined by his size and his strength. David's rise to power is critical in this section. In fact, his rise to power in the Bible is what comprises the third significant section of the 2 books of Samuel. It runs from 1 Samuel 15:35 all the way to 2 Samuel 5:10. This is important because no matter how you read or hear the story in this 17th chapter, there is so much happening before and then within that context and then within another context. Keeping all of the different people straight, Jesse and Saul and David and Goliath, is actually quite challenging. I think this is the reason so many of us miss at least part of the story. But we know some of the basics. David is a young shepherd boy with faith in the Lord. Goliath is his bigger and taller opponent. He fights with bronze armaments. He comes with a sword, a spear, a large shield. He even has a shield bearer. God reveals that David has his favor and is the chosen one to be king. In fact, God reveals this so early, none of these other people know this yet. David doesn't even know it yet. It is revealed in the prior chapter, 16. However, it is then revealed to Samuel as he's grieving over the disappointment that God has rejected Saul as the king of Israel. Now you may be saying, wait a minute, Saul is the king in this. But Saul has already lost favor with God by the time we begin today's text. God tells Samuel that one of the sons of Jesse of Bethlehem is to be king of Israel. The truth is that doesn't entirely narrow it down. The man has 8 sons, almost like a plot spoiler. This puts us in the position of knowing something that those who are living through all of this do not know. And it's important to think of that lens as you hear this story. They have no idea what the outcome will be. Perhaps we even worry less when David uses heavy armor and arms he cannot manage, and then he picks up a slingshot and a smooth stone and goes after Goliath. For us, he is modeling bravery, faith in God. But for the people, this is all a bit of a shock. We know that he's going to have to win it all someday because he's supposed to live and become the king. However, the Bible tells us that his own brother takes him on and gets in a fight with him because he thinks he's just come to watch the battle. David's older brothers clearly do not see David as having any special favor. There is a process to come by which all will receive this revelation. In chapter 16, verses 14 to 17, Saul is tormented by an evil spirit. So if we back up a little bit, we realize that evil spirit has actually been sent by God. The Lord is seeking to put into motion what will happen. Saul then seeks a musician who can come and play for him to calm him. And of course, as these prophetic biblical moments have a way of playing out, a servant of Saul is familiar with David. We get a glimpse of what is to come, as in the Bible, the servant tells Saul that David the shepherd boy is skillful at playing, and he is also, quote, a man of valor, a warrior, prudent in speech, and a man of good presence, and the Lord is with him. Well, this would seem like an awfully strong character reference for a man who we know everyone sees as a shepherd and the youngest of 8 and a musician. But he is asked to come and play some music to calm the king. And that is really what launches the destiny we find in today's text. However, we already know, because we are familiar with it, how much there is to the story, because God has made up God's mind, and God has decided that Saul will not remain king. David is on the journey that will lead him to the throne of Israel. And as chapter 17 begins and his destiny in facing Goliath arrives, we realize this moment is really a form of test. God already knows how all of this is going to unfold, of course, no doubt, but the masses do not. They need for David to model what he is capable of so that their loyalty and belief will turn, so that they will come to see this young shepherd boy as far more. David proves willing to undertake any task that the Lord places in front of him. He's not afraid, and he is both practical and brave. When he is not familiar with the heavy bronze armor, he takes it off so as to fight in better form. Instead of using the state-of-the-art weapons that Goliath has, he is happy with his slingshot and 5 smooth stones. He is true to himself, though he never has to use 4 of those stones according to scripture. He is successful because Goliath is felled by the very first stone shot by David. David makes it clear that this battle with Goliath is a witness to the power of God, that those who stand with God will always ultimately win, no matter their armaments. David makes the statement in verse 47 that by these events, all may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's. I believe that these words remain true today. Ukraine is a nation of people of very strong faith. In fact, they had churches and monasteries erected before Moscow, Russia even existed. It was but woods and fields then. Ukraine did not look for this battle. It has been brought upon them by an evil dictator. There is no nicer way to put that. He may very well have ideas that he will someday take over the world. He has certainly cultivated a tiny little group of allies and prepared for this. He is the Goliath in our modern moment. He thinks nothing of bombing civilian targets, of attempting to bring a sovereign country to his knees to suit his own ends. Lest we think he won't go as far as possible, why would anyone want to overcome the Ukrainian guards at Chernobyl and seize control of Chernobyl? Why would that have any value unless you had a very evil plan to repurpose some part of that into further weaponry? I believe that God will be with the Ukrainians and already is. When you look at what's happening and you hear how many different places tanks and bombs have been used, it is a miracle that they have less than 300 confirmed casualties so far. That's extraordinary. I believe God is already with them and they will not be forsaken. But I don't think this is going to be the type of thing that's over quickly. And I do pray for the rest of the world and the leaders of the free world, because the burden that they carry about what to do about this is extraordinary. We must continue to pray for Ukraine as we pray for those around the world who live in any form of fear, oppression, and hardship. They are facing death, persecution, and displacement. I believe that people are becoming more and more aware as the world gets smaller, thanks mostly to technology. The recent Olympics hosted by China were the least viewed Olympics of all time since any form of technology became available around the world. Thousands more people will become refugees from the Ukrainian situation. It is already happening as you see the pictures of folks flooding into Poland and other nearby countries. This situation may not resolve quickly, but it is going to resolve. And there really is only one side for us to be on: the side of ethics and integrity, of justice for innocent life. Putin will lose. I have no doubt at all he will lose. But it will be an ultimate loss, a loss like we saw Hitler lose. And I do hope that God will punish Putin for his actions. And I hope that the rest of the world will be standing with God. We receive Jesus with our hearts by confession with our mouth, as the scripture in Romans says. Please, as you are so moved, may you come forward and may you claim Jesus as your Lord.
Oh, there's no announcements that I have at the moment. Yeah.
I know these are difficult times. I know that it is hard to even come to worship. Many of us feel so lost. I pray that the Lord our God is a comfort to you. God got up this morning. God never went to bed last night. God is in charge of this situation, not only in our little lives, but all around the world, overseeing all that happens. Remember who our God is, all-knowing and all-powerful. May you rest in God this week. May you know that you are protected and be prepared to share your protection with others in need. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.